Welcome to a world where the wilderness holds secrets darker than the night. In this video, I'll uncover 3 horrifying true hiking stories that will leave you questioning every step into the woods. These tales of terror are not for the faint-hearted. Each chapter reveals eerie encounters, vanishing hikers, and the sinister unknown lurking in nature's shadows. Are you ready to face your fears? Let's begin. Story 1. The Screams in the Woods. Mark and Lisa were avid hikers always looking for their next adventure. Black Hollow Trail, infamous for its eerie atmosphere and local legends, seemed like the perfect challenge. The couple dismissed the rumors about people vanishing on the trail as mere superstition. However, as they stepped into the dense forest, an unsettling silence enveloped them. The usual sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves were absent. Instead, faint whispers seemed to drift through the trees, too low to make out but enough to make Lisa glance nervously at Mark. Probably the wind, Mark reassured her, though his own unease was growing. As they trekked deeper, the whispers grew louder, like a chorus of unseen voices. Shadows seemed to shift just out of sight, and the feeling of being watched became impossible to ignore. By midday, the couple stumbled upon a clearing dominated by a decaying wooden cabin. Its roof sagged under the weight of decades of neglect, and ivy crept up the weathered walls. Lisa hesitated, but Mark convinced her to take a look inside, citing curiosity. The interior was damp and reeked of mold. Strange symbols, crudely etched into the walls, stood out like warnings. On a rotting table lay a diary. The entries described a family that had lived in the area decades ago, plagued by unexplainable events. Disembodied voices, missing livestock, and finally, the disappearance of their youngest child. The final entry read, "The woods demand a sacrifice." Before they could process the chilling message, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence, coming from somewhere outside the cabin. Panicked, Mark and Lisa bolted from the cabin, the diary clutched in Lisa's trembling hands. The scream came again, closer this time, splitting the air with its unnatural pitch. Mark's flashlight cut through the darkening woods, catching glimpses of shadowy figures darting between the trees. The whispers grew into a cacophony, blending with the cries of an unseen predator. Lisa stumbled, her ankle twisting as she hit the ground hard. Mark grabbed her arm, hoisting her up as something cold brushed against his shoulder. It felt like a hand, wet, icy, and impossibly strong. They ran blindly, the forest seeming to shift and conspire to keep them trapped. Their frantic flight brought them to a stone altar hidden deep in the forest. Its surface was slick with moss and streaked with what looked horrifyingly like dried blood. Surrounding the altar were torn pieces of clothing, shoes, and other belongings, some looking decades old. Mark froze, realization dawning. This is where they bring them, he whispered, his voice shaking. Lisa's breathing grew ragged as a guttural voice echoed from the shadows, saying only, "Leave or be taken." They turned to flee, but no matter which direction they ran, the forest paths looped back to the altar as if the woods themselves were alive. By dawn, Lisa was gone. Mark had passed out from exhaustion at the foot of the altar, only to awaken to her belongings neatly arranged on its surface. The whispers had turned to mocking laughter. Desperate, Mark screamed her name, but his voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. He tried to leave, but the forest refused to let him go. Days later, hikers found Mark's car abandoned at the trailhead. Of Mark and Lisa, there was no trace, only the haunting echoes of their final moments. Story 2. The Vanishing Hiker. Emma loved the solitude of solo hiking. Devil's Ridge was her latest conquest, a trail infamous for its dangerous cliffs and sudden, disorienting fog. She was prepared, as always, with maps, supplies, and her trusty journal. The trip started uneventfully, but as she climbed higher, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The forest was too quiet, the usual sounds of wildlife conspicuously absent. She wrote in her journal about an unsettling sensation, as if unseen eyes followed her every move. "It's just nerves," she scribbled, but the unease clung to her. By late afternoon, a thick fog rolled in, obscuring the trail. The trees loomed like shadowy sentinels, and Emma found herself relying on her compass to stay on course. That's when she saw him. A man sitting on a rock, staring blankly ahead. His clothes were tattered, and his skin was pale as death. "Are you okay?" she asked, but he didn't respond. Instead, he muttered, "Turn back. You don't belong here." The words chilled her, but she laughed nervously and pressed on, leaving the stranger behind. Hours later, she regretted her decision. Emma's compass began malfunctioning, spinning wildly. The fog grew denser, and familiar landmarks reappeared as if she were walking in circles. She started hearing voices in the mist, her late father calling her name, her childhood friend's laughter. Panic set in as she realized the voices were leading her toward the edge of a cliff. At the cliff, the fog parted to reveal an ethereal light below. It was mesmerizing, and Emma felt an overwhelming compulsion to step closer. Her final journal entry described the pull of the light. "It's calling me. I think I understand now. I have to go." The entry ended abruptly, ink smeared as if the pen had been dropped mid-sentence. Search teams found Emma's journal and one of her boots near the cliff. Her body was never recovered. Other hikers claimed to see her figure in the fog, standing at the cliff's edge. Sometimes, they hear her voice, a faint whisper begging for help, or worse, urging them to follow her. Story 3. The Cursed Campsite. Tom, Sarah, Jake, and Mia were lifelong friends who loved camping. They chose Redwood National Park for their weekend getaway, venturing far off the main trail to ensure privacy. The first night was perfect. A roaring campfire, shared stories, and the vast canopy of stars overhead. However, the mood shifted the next morning when they found strange carvings on the trees around their campsite. The symbols were intricate, almost ritualistic. Mia joked about ancient curses, but Sarah couldn't shake her unease. As night fell, the carvings seemed to glow faintly under the moonlight. Sarah woke up screaming, convinced she'd seen a shadowy figure watching them. The others tried to calm her, but the sense of being watched persisted. Jake spotted what looked like glowing eyes in the distance, and the group's laughter gave way to tense silence. The following morning, Jake was gone. His tent was undisturbed, but his backpack and boots were missing. They searched for hours, calling his name, but the forest seemed to swallow their voices. That night, Mia disappeared, her terrified screams waking Tom and Sarah. The two decided to leave immediately, but the paths twisted back to their cursed campsite no matter which direction they took. By the third night, Tom was frantic. He armed himself with a makeshift spear, determined to protect Sarah. But the shadowy figure returned, its guttural growls sending chills down their spines. When Tom stepped away to investigate a noise, he never came back. Sarah, alone and trembling, could only wait for the inevitable. Weeks later, rangers found Sarah's torn diary in the ashes of their campfire. Her final entries described the shadow stalking them and her mounting terror as her friends vanished one by one. The last entry simply read, "It's here. Locals now avoid the area," whispering about vengeful spirits protecting the forest. Those who ignore the warning seldom return. Thank you for joining me on this terrifying journey into the unknown. The forest may seem serene, but as these stories have shown, it holds secrets darker than we could ever imagine. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-tingling horror stories. Let me know in the comments which story haunted you the most, or share your own eerie experiences. Love to hear them. Until next time, stay safe and remember, not every path leads you back home.